Jean Bradley with CSAVE Foundation, and today I'm here with Susan Lieberman, the Director of International Policy with the Pew Foundation. And I first met Susan on an NPR interview. I was listening, I wasn't on it, and it was fabulous. Susan has the ability to really break down fairly complicated issues, fairly complicated politics into basic terms, and I was just really enthralled with her ability to communicate what was going on, what was happening with sharks in a general sense, as well as what was going to happen here at CITES. So I'm delighted to have you here. Thank you very much for taking a couple minutes.
Sure.
And I was hoping that you might go back over and just sort of start on a fundamental level.
Sure.
Why is this important? Why is it important that we get these 4 proposals passed?
Well, let me explain. Step back a couple steps. CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, has been around for 40 years, and it's about regulating trade in species that might become threatened, and it's about banning trade in threatened species. And it's the only international treaty that deals with trade in wildlife. And wildlife is plants, animals, it's fish, it's elephants, etc. So it bans trade in elephant ivory and rhino horn and tiger bone and a whole lot else, and it regulates trade in things that may become threatened, like American alligator or all of the parrots, for example. It's a very successful treaty. It has 178 governments. But for commercial marine fish, it's been really difficult to get governments to look at the species that may become threatened and say, yeah, we need to regulate trade in shark fins, just like we regulate trade in python leathers. If you buy shoes, for example, made with python leathers, those are all CITES Appendix II. Or alligator purses, and it doesn't ban the trade, but governments are resistant because fisheries doesn't want to admit we're decimating the oceans. We're wiping out species in the ocean, and if we admit that they should be covered by CITES, governments might be admitting they need to do something about this problem, and that's why it's so significant here. The hammerhead sharks are in terrible trouble, and it's because of the fin trade to China and other countries in East Asia. The oceanic whitetip is in horrible trouble for the same reason, and the poor beagle shark as well, for its fins and its meat. The vote that was taken a couple days ago was fantastic, and we're hoping that tomorrow, when it comes up in the final plenary, it's not overturned. I've seen things get overturned before, so it's going to be touch and go. But that's why it's important, because it would mean the governments of the world say, we need to do something about this. For example, caviar, if you've ever eaten caviar, it's all in CITES too. It's all regulated. It doesn't stop the trade, but it stops the trade that's illegal or unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I heard you speak, and Susan made an intervention.
Which is a funny word for just a speech.
She made a great speech, and it really revealed how much work you've put into this, how much scientific information you've compiled. You really had such a grasp on the subject.
Thank you.
How obviously Pew has put so much time, effort, and funds into preparing for CITES. Can you tell us a little bit about what that...
Sure. The Pew Environment Group has been working on this really since the last CITES meeting 3 years ago. I've been working on CITES since 1989. But when I worked for the U.S. government, I ran the CITES Scientific Authority, worked for WWF International for 8 years. So I've been working on CITES for a long time, so I know how this works. But the Pew Environment Group has been working with governments to help provide them the science, to work with them, to make sure the proposals are scientifically sound. We also heard from some governments at the last CITES meeting who said, oh, we can't identify the fins, it's impossible. So we commissioned some top scientific experts to develop a fin identification guide. We didn't know how it was going to come out. We said, well, maybe they're right, maybe they're hard to identify, but let's ask the scientists, and the identification guide shows it's really easy to identify. So we've put a lot in terms of science and resources and working with governments. What was great here is how many governments not just voted for these proposals, but what's called co-sponsored them. Put their name on the line and said, we're the government of Brazil. We're not just going to vote for it, but we're going to sponsor it and stand up for it. So that was part of our strategy.
Yeah, and I think it's delightful. It's a great strategy. And as a small aside, I received a communication from a teacher who is working with her elementary school kids, and she saw what you were doing with identification of the fins, and she put her kids to the task of identifying the fins, and they got it 100%.
Fantastic. That's
so
fantastic.
I have to get you more information about that.
That's great. That's great.
I know that this CITES has been really daunting. It's overwhelming, the amount of information that's out there. It's also very hopeful and exciting that so many people are engaged on Facebook, everywhere, and so many governments are working together, so many NGOs are working together. This is truly a global effort that I think is making a global difference. And it is a bit overwhelming. And would you mind telling us a bit, what is this appendix thing? I mean, everybody knows it's endangered, it's threatened, it's extinct, but this appendix thing, how does that translate?
Well, the way the treaty is written, the treaty was agreed in 1973. Every country other than the U.S. calls it the Washington Convention, in fact, but the U.S. doesn't, has two appendices, two main appendices. Appendix 1 means it's an appendix to the treaty, that's all that means, are species that are threatened and trade is banned. So that's African and Asian elephants and rhinos and tigers and gorillas and chimpanzees, whales, dolphins, etc. No trade, no commercial trade is allowed in those species. Appendix 2 is the appendix to the treaty with species that may become threatened unless trade is regulated. So if a species is listed there, if a country wants to export, they have to issue a permit, a document. They have to certify that their scientists have said it's not harmful to the species. And they have to certify that it's legal, and then it can go in international trade, and customs on the importing country, if they're a member of CITES, agrees to look for the document, double check, and if they have a question, contact the exporting country and say, did you do the science? Is it really okay for the species? That's all that means. And what is proposed here for these sharks is just Appendix 2. It's not a trade ban. It just says regulate the trade, make sure it's sustainable. If you ask me, I think it should all be sustainable.
Yeah.
We shouldn't wait for species to be down to 20 or 10% of their natural numbers before governments agree to protect them. But at least I hope we get these here, because I think it will be a sign that again, it takes 2/3 of the countries to adopt a proposal here. That's really a heavy lift. That's a pretty high bar. But if we got the 2/3 in the committee, it was amazing, and I'm hopeful it will hold in the plenary.
Well, we definitely all have our fins crossed, and
Yeah.
We hope this big guy is going
He's in
to...
CITES Appendix 2. The whale shark already is in CITES, but he's not in trade as much as these species are.
And I think that your good work, your hard work, definitely has moved international awareness forward, and I hope it plays out. And these 4 proposals are not overturned. A lot of people are looking to them. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for covering
so much for all of the work that you've done.
Thank you. Yes, it is daunting. It's overwhelming. If you've never been to one of these before, it can be pretty overwhelming, but here's hoping for tomorrow.
Yes, let's hope. Thank you.